What if the most protected nuclear material on Earth is not hidden because it is safe? What if it is hidden because everyone is afraid of what happens if someone finds it? Deep beneath a mountain in central Iran, buried under layers of rock and secrecy, sits the center of one of the most dangerous strategic confrontations in the world. Not a missile, not a fighter jet, not a naval fleet, a stockpile. A few hundred kilograms of enriched uranium that is transformed from a scientific asset into a global pressure point. Because the real question is no longer whether Iran can protect the material. The real question is whether Iran can continue protecting it without creating an even bigger threat. And that is the contradiction at the center of this story. The weapon designed to guarantee survival may have become the reason the entire world is watching. Most people see this conflict through the images that appear: first aircraft crossing the night sky, explosions near military facilities, warships moving through strategic waterways, political leaders making threats. It looks like another chapter in a familiar cycle of Middle Eastern confrontation. But the surface image hides something much more complicated. Because this conflict is not only about what has been destroyed, it is about what survived. And what survived may matter more than everything that was hit. The hero of this story is not a person. It is not a country. It is a place. A mountain, a hardened underground complex, believed by analysts to be connected to Iran's most sensitive nuclear activities. A place where geography, engineering, because in modern warfare, the strongest fortress is not always the one that cannot be attacked. Sometimes it is the one that forces an enemy to ask whether attacking is worth the consequences. To understand why this mountain matters, we have to go back to the moment when the world believed Iran's nuclear program had been pushed backward. The sky above Iran changed. Long-range aircraft traveled thousands of miles. Precision weapons were released against some of the most protected facilities in the country. The targets were carefully selected: enrichment sites, infrastructure, command systems, facilities connected to Iran's nuclear ambitions. The message was clear. Advanced air power could reach deep into protected territory. The United States and its allies wanted to prove that distance and fortification were no longer enough to guarantee safety. For a moment, many observers believed the problem had been solved. The visible battlefield told a simple story. Bombs hit facilities were damaged. Infrastructure was disrupted. But here is the problem. Modern wars are rarely decided by what the public can see. They are decided by what remains hidden. Before the strikes ever happened, intelligence agencies were already watching. Satellite images showed unusual activity, vehicles moving near sensitive locations, preparations that suggested Iran understood the possibility of an attack. The important detail was not that Iran had built underground facilities. The important detail was that Iran had learned from previous attacks. A country does not build deeper because it wants to hide from one bomb. It builds deeper because it expects the next one. That changes the entire equation, because every defensive improvement creates a new offensive challenge. The deeper the facility goes, the more advanced the weapon required to reach it. The stronger the bunker becomes, the more pressure grows to develop weapons designed specifically to defeat it. A fortress does not end the competition. It moves the competition underground. And this is where the mountain becomes more than a physical location. It becomes a strategic symbol. For Iran, underground facilities represent survival. They represent independence from foreign pressure, a guarantee that critical capabilities cannot simply be removed by an airstrike. But for Washington and its allies, the same mountain represents something completely different. A hidden uncertainty, a location where sensitive material could exist beyond international verification. A question that intelligence agencies cannot ignore. Because nuclear strategy is not only about what a country has, it is about what other countries believe it might have. And uncertainty creates pressure. The part most people miss is that the uranium itself is only one part of the problem. The second part is trust. And trust is much harder to destroy than a building. Inside military command centers, the calculation looks different. A target is not simply marked by coordinates. It is measured by consequences. What happens after the strike? What happens if the material is moved? What happens if the facility survives? What happens if it does not? Every possible action creates another problem. That is the reality of strategic warfare. There are no perfect moves, only choices with different risks. The United States has some of the most powerful bunker-penetrating weapons ever created. But here is the contradiction. Having the weapon does not automatically solve the problem, because destroying a physical location does not always remove the strategic question behind it. The weapon designed for this exact kind of challenge is the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a massive precision bomb built for one purpose: reach targets that ordinary weapons cannot. It represents decades of American engineering focused on defeating hardened underground facilities. But even the most advanced weapon faces a fundamental question. How deep is too deep? A bomb can penetrate concrete. It can break through structures. It can destroy underground spaces, but geology does not negotiate. A mountain made of dense rock creates a different kind of battlefield, one where engineering meets uncertainty. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the situation so dangerous. Because military planners are not asking only, can we hit it? They are asking, what happens if we try and fail? Meanwhile, the conflict around Iran has expanded far beyond the mountain, because nuclear strategy does not exist separately from economics and geography. Look at the Persian Gulf. On a satellite image, the region appears as a narrow passage of water, but that narrow passage connects energy markets around the world. Very threat to shipping creates pressure far beyond the battlefield. A tanker delayed in the Gulf affects prices thousands of miles away. A naval confrontation changes insurance costs. A military decision in the Middle East creates economic consequences in countries that are not involved. This is why the conflict is larger than Iran alone. The battlefield stretches from underground facilities to global markets, from military bases to financial centers, from satellite images to political decisions, and that creates the next contradiction. Iran's leadership wants the uranium to represent strength, a symbol that the country cannot be forced into surrender. But the longer the material remains hidden, the more it becomes a reason for continued pressure. The very thing designed to create leverage may be creating isolation. Instead, a strategic asset can become a strategic burden. A shield can become a target. And that is the trap forming beneath the mountain. Because Iran is not only defending a facility, it is defending a choice. A choice about sovereignty. A choice about negotiation. A choice about how much pressure it can absorb. The world now watches the mountain for one reason. Not because it is simply a military target, but because it represents a question that modern warfare keeps asking again and again: can technology protect a nation from strategic reality? A bunker can survive a missile. A government can survive sanctions. A military can survive losses. But can a country survive the uncertainty created by its own strategy? Because the deeper this conflict goes, the clearer one lesson becomes. The battlefield is moving. It is no longer only above ground. It is not only in the air. It is not only at sea. It is inside the calculations made by leaders who know that every decision creates another consequence. And beneath one mountain in Iran, those consequences are now converged. But the mountain was never the real target. The uranium was. And even that is not the deepest layer of this conflict, because a stockpile hidden beneath rock is only dangerous because of what it represents. A decision, a calculation, a question that no missile can completely destroy. What if the most important battlefield in this war is not somewhere underground in Iran? What if it exists inside the minds of the people deciding how far they are willing to go. Because the deeper this confrontation moves, the clearer one thing becomes. The United States is not only trying to destroy weapons. Iran is not only trying to protect facilities. Both sides are fighting over something far harder to measure: control over uncertainty. And this changes everything. Everyone thinks this battle is about uranium, missiles, and airstrikes. But the real battle is about who controls the future decisions of the other side. That is the invisible battlefield, the one that does not appear on satellite images, the one that does not create explosions, but the one that determines whether explosions happen at all. Look at the mountain again. A massive underground facility appears to be the ultimate symbol of protection: concrete, granite, depth, engineering. A fortress built to survive the strongest weapons on Earth. But here is the problem. A fortress does not remove vulnerability. It changes where vulnerability lives. The mountain may protect material from bombs, but it cannot protect the political consequences surrounding that material. Because every day the uranium remains hidden, another question grows louder. What is inside? Where is it? Who controls it? And how long can the world accept not knowing? The lesson here is one of the oldest principles in strategic warfare. Information itself is power. A country does not need to use a weapon to create fear. Sometimes uncertainty becomes the weapon. And right now, uncertainty is exactly what is keeping this conflict alive. Thousands of miles away from the mountain, another battlefield tells the same story: the Persian Gulf. On a satellite image, the region looks simple: a narrow stretch of water, a few shipping lanes, a few coastlines, but that thin blue line carries a huge percentage of the world's energy trade. And that is why the conflict around Iran has never only been about Iran. Because oil does not care about borders. Markets do not wait for diplomacy. And global economies react to fear before they react to facts. A single missile launch near a tanker route can move prices around the world. A single naval deployment can force companies to reroute ships. A single political statement can change decisions made thousands of miles away. The part most people miss is that modern warfare is no longer measured only by territory captured. It is measured by systems disrupted. A missile does not need to sink a ship to create damage. It only needs to make companies afraid to send one. That is the economic battlefield. The invisible battlefield. The same principle applies to the air campaign. The F-16's precision bombs and drones are not important only because of what they destroy. They matter because of what they force the enemy to do. Move, hide, spend resources, change plans. Every aircraft in the sky creates thousands of decisions on the ground. Every radar signal creates uncertainty inside a command center. Every precision strike creates pressure on the people trying to predict the next one. Strategically, this changes the entire calculation. The weapon is not always the bomb. The weapon is the problem the bomb creates. But Iran's challenge goes beyond the battlefield, because military power requires fuel. Not just aviation fuel, political fuel, economic fuel, institutional fuel. And this is where pressure becomes dangerous. A military can survive losing equipment. It can replace missiles. It can rebuild a radar station. But rebuilding confidence inside a country is much harder. Imagine a leadership watching 3 screens at the same time. The first screen shows military losses. The second shows economic decline. The third shows internal disagreement. That is a different kind of war won that happens far away from the front line. Because governments do not collapse only when they lose battles. They weaken when the cost of continuing becomes harder to justify. The bigger picture is that every strike creates a second effect. The physical damage is visible. The psychological damage is not. A destroyed command center. A commander wondering whether his next location is already known. Is another a damaged missile facility can be repaired. A network that no longer trusts its own communications is much harder to rebuild. This is why modern warfare increasingly focuses on systems rather than individual targets. The goal is not simply to remove objects. The goal is to reduce the enemy's ability to make effective decisions. And this brings us to the next transformation, because the future battlefield is already beginning to look different. The next generation of warfare may not be dominated by the biggest aircraft, or the largest missile, or the strongest bunker. It may be dominated by the side that connects the most information the fastest. Inside a future command center, the most important screen may not show a single enemy target. It may show thousands of small signals. A drone moving near a coastline. A radar changing position. A communication pattern suddenly disappearing. A supply route becoming active. The battlefield becomes a giant puzzle. And artificial intelligence becomes the system trying to solve it before the enemy does. This is why autonomous drones are becoming so important. Not because they replace humans completely, but because they extend human decision. Making an F-16 pilot can only look in so many directions. A network of unmanned systems can watch far more. A commander can only process so much information. A machine can sort patterns at a speed no human can match. The more technology improves, the more vulnerable complex systems become. A smarter battlefield creates smarter weapons. But it also creates more opportunities for disruption. A single cyber attack, a broken data link, a false signal, a corrupted piece of information. The future war may not be decided by who has more weapons. It may be decided by who can trust their information. This is the lesson hidden inside the Iran confrontation. The mountain, the uranium, the aircraft, the blockade, the drones. They are not separate stories. They are different pieces of one larger transformation. Modern warfare is moving away from destroying armies. It is moving toward controlling choices. A nation can still possess missiles. It can still build underground facilities. It can still maintain military forces. But if every decision becomes slower, if every movement becomes visible, if every resource becomes more expensive, then power begins to change meaning. The strongest force is not always the one that can destroy the most. Sometimes it is the one that can force the other side to constantly react. That is why the uranium hidden beneath a mountain matters so much. Because it represents more than nuclear material. It represents a strategic dilemma. A country trying to preserve leverage may create the very pressure that threatens its survival. And a military trying to eliminate a threat may discover that destroying an object does not always eliminate the reason behind the conflict. So where does this leave the world? The question is no longer whether a bunker can survive a bomb. The real question is whether any weapon can survive a battlefield where information, economics, technology, and politics are connected into one system. Because the next great conflicts may not be decided by who owns the most powerful weapon. They may be decided by who understands the battlefield faster, who adapts faster, who can turn uncertainty into advantage, and who can survive when every advantage creates a new vulnerability. The mountain may be made of granite, but the real battlefield is much harder to break. It exists in decisions, in calculations, in fear, in time. So the question is, do you believe future wars will be won by stronger weapons or by the nations that build the smarter systems behind those weapons?